Gear 5 has broken the anime world twice now, and even though it's already one of the most iconic transformations in anime history, there are still a ton of unanswered questions and mysteries surrounding these incredible powers. And so today we're going to discuss everything that we know about Gear 5 and Luffy's mythical sun god Nika's own devil fruit. Starting with how Luffy actually awakened this legendary power in the first place, and wow, let me tell you, it seems like Luffy unlocked it by straight up dying. Because in episode 1070, Kaido absolutely crushes Luffy and our Straw Hat captain is apparently dead for a moment here. And while this part isn't exactly clear, Kaido sure seems to think that Luffy has died for good this time and heads down on a rampage inside the castle. And Momonosuke claims that Luffy's voice is quote-unquote gone, and since Momo has the voice of all things, we should be fairly confident that Momo isn't making things up right here, although there is another explanation for this that we'll discuss in just a moment. Because right after, we get this legendary smile, and with this, Joy Boy has returned. Which actually means that Luffy has awakened his devil fruit and unlocked the true powers of that devil fruit. Plus, quite conveniently I'd say, the 5 Elder Stars explain to us in that moment that Luffy's devil fruit is really not the Gomu Gomu no Mi, but it is instead the mythical zone human fruit, model sun god Nika. And so before we get into all the crazy changes that this will make to the story later on, let's explain first what these powers appear to allow Luffy to do in the first place. First of all, the Elder Stars go on to explain that the first ability of this fruit is to turn the user's body into rubber, so that part is pretty consistent with what we thought about Luffy's devil fruit all along in the first place. But that is of course only the beginning, because we're then told that when fighting, the user is supposedly only limited by their imagination, which is the most interesting part of course about Luffy's new power-up. And that's because Luffy then reaches down into the castle with an enormous fist and grabs the giant dragon Kaido like he is a child playing with some sort of snake toy. And then we truly get to see these wild powers in action, because Luffy puffs up his muscles like a cartoon character, swings Kaido around like a tornado, and slams him back and forth as if Kaido was light as a feather. In other words, clearly, Luffy has gained an incredible power boost since he's able to casually beat down Kaido and Emperor like we've never seen before in the story. Which of course brings us to his next super broken ability, which is actually something that is normal for Paramecia Devil Fruit awakenings. That's because we also see Luffy literally grab the rooftop and bend it up to block Kaido's blast breath. And so basically what he's doing here is turning his environment into rubber, which we've seen many times before with awakened Paramecia Devil Fruits like Doflamingo Strings or Katakuri's Mochi. However, something even more unique about Luffy's awakened powers is that he can also seemingly turn other people into rubber as well. We do see this later when he blows up Kaido like a balloon, stretches through Kaido's eyeballs and body, plus even more stuff. And so his awakening clearly allows him to turn both the environment, but also other living people and beings into rubber, at least when he's touching them. But perhaps the most broken of Luffy's abilities, and the one that most people think of with Gear 5, is Luffy's newfound ability to make his imagination into reality. Let me repeat that. He can turn his imagination into reality, and this is where the Devil Fruit truly becomes one of the most overpowered abilities in the series. Because as we've already seen, Luffy can now do things that just seem absolutely impossible, such as freely manipulating his size to become bigger and buffer, even giant size. And we will even see later on that he can apparently create things out of thin air like goggles. But that's just the start, because Luffy's new powers might also explain one of the biggest mysteries about his powers ever since the time skip. That's because back in Fishman Island, Luffy first revealed that he somehow had fire powers when he defeated this fishman here with his Red Hawk attack. And then, as you'll remember, just a while ago against Kaido, he used an even bigger red rock fire attack, which just completely blew my mind in the anime, by the way. And for years, many people have been theorizing that Luffy could use fire because of super hot friction, but now we finally know for sure that his fire abilities most likely have just been an early example of Luffy's extraordinary Devil Fruit awakening and basically him imagining his brother's powers. And honestly, that might just be the start of Luffy's elemental abilities, because, little spoiler warning here, Gear 5 has even allowed Luffy to grab lightning and throw it at his opponent. So in the future, he might even be able to manipulate other elements or even devil fruit abilities with his absurdly powerful new abilities. However, there are some very important and severe drawbacks and limitations to this ability that we simply have to discuss as well, including one that might actually change Luffy forever. But first, even though it's explained that Luffy is only limited by his imagination basically, it is definitely not an unlimited power. For example, he cannot just quote-unquote imagine that Kaido is defeated and it will automatically happen. So it isn't an instant win, wish for anything kind of condition. Also, the Gear 5 powers seem mostly contained to Luffy's body or things that he seems to be touching. So he cannot just snap his fingers and change the world, at least not yet. Which actually brings us to the very crucial fact that much like Luffy's earlier gear transformations, Gear 2nd, 3rd, or 4th, when Luffy uses his awakened powers, it does seem to dramatically drain his stamina and possibly even his lifespan. In fact, we even see him comment that he only has a few minutes to use this power and also witness a terrifying transformation into an old man during a break in the fighting. But all of this is nothing compared to one other potential danger of Luffy's awakening, because remember when we said that Luffy seemed to die before he awakened his powers? Well, one theory about Luffy's awakening is that he actually did die, and then the spirit of his devil fruit somehow took over Luffy's body. And there's actually some real evidence supporting this, such as Luffy's heartbeat clearly changing and his uncontrollable laughter while using this new form. And I mean, even the giant elephant Sunisha comments that this is the first time that they have heard Luffy's unique sounding heartbeat in over 800 years. And then they even make it absolutely clear that Joy Boy, their old comrade, has once and for all returned. So while this hasn't been clearly explained even in the manga at this point, it is possible that by dying, Luffy somehow allowed the spirit of Joy Boy to literally enter his body and bring Luffy back to life. Which, yeah, does sound weird, but we do have to also consider that devil fruits do seem to have a will of their own, so the spirit of Joy Boy may have been living inside the devil fruit for all these hundreds of years, just waiting for the right person to finally awaken these abilities. Now, you may be asking, why is this supposed to be dangerous for Luffy? Well, when we first see this transformation, it is a little bit scary to see Luffy laughing maniacally like this right here, and it does seem that he literally cannot stop laughing. So we have to at least consider the idea that Luffy's awakening has let some ancient spirit come in and alter his personality here. Which might very well be the reason why Momo felt that Luffy's voice disappeared, because it is possible that his voice just completely changed once he unlocked Gear 5. And while this might sound unlikely, who really knows what could be possible with these new abilities, although one thing that we have been shown throughout the entire series is that whenever Luffy unlocks a new ability, such as Gear 2nd, 3rd, or 4th, at first at least, Luffy has some very serious drawbacks, like a time limit or turning into a chibi Luffy, but eventually he then masters the new power and can use it without much limitation. And so maybe the same will happen for Gear 5 in the future as well, which could lead to an even more powerful Luffy in the future, even though this is likely his last major gear upgrade for now. But before we get into all the insane foreshadowing and future importance of Gear 5 for the story and the anime, let's discuss for a moment here the history of this actual devil fruit. Because we knew all the way back at the start of the story that Shanks and his crew stole this legendary devil fruit from a world government ship. And so the world government did have it at some point, which always made me wonder why they had it in the first place. Well, thankfully, we've recently had some more context about this from Who's Who was one of the CP9 agents on that ship. And since this was CP9 with the devil fruit, it does make me believe that they were sent on a specific mission to find and retrieve this devil fruit. And so it seems like the world government has been hunting this fruit, which was actually 100% confirmed in this episode, when the Elder Stars tell us that the world government has been trying and failing to acquire this fruit for 800 years. Wow. Imagine searching for anything for that long, having finally found it, and then losing it when some pirates steal it from your ship. However, then we also have to ask ourselves why they wanted it so badly, but I think we can clearly see the answer to that question in this episode. Not only is it simply an insane power strength-wise that apparently hasn't been awoken ever since the Void Century, but the government must also be worried about some secret abilities that we still don't know about. And honestly, it could very well be related to the One Piece itself. We'll discuss more about that in a moment, but the government were so scared of someone unlocking its true powers that they even changed the Devil Fruit's official name to the Gomu Gomu no Mi to keep people away from it. But now that Luffy has awakened it, we're going to see exactly why they have been trying to claim it and keep it secret for all these years. However, not everybody seemed to be as thrilled with Luffy's new powers, especially the reveal that we had his Devil Fruit wrong all this time for over 20 years. And while admittedly it isn't the most clearly foreshadowed twist in One Piece, there are absolutely scenes throughout the story that we can point to that might have very well hinted at these legendary powers. And of course, it all begins with the very first image that we have of the newly awakened Joy Boy. And if you're thinking that this image looks familiar, well, that would be because we've seen a very similar pose multiple times in the story. For example, it shows up twice in both of the bonfire scenes on Skypiea. So clearly, this pose was already established way back in the story, and this is even more important when you consider the context of the Skypiea arc. Really, the entire point of this adventure was to free the Skypiean people from the false god Enel, and how does Luffy do this? Well, ultimately, he wins the final clash by breaking up the dark clouds to allow the sun to shine down on the praying people below. And now, if that isn't super important foreshadowing for Luffy being the literal sun god, then I do not know what is. Besides, the concept of the dawn is a huge symbolic device in all of One Piece, and Luffy's victories are often paralleled with the sun literally rising, like on Thriller Bark, or a dark period on an island's history finally ending, like on Alabasta or Dressrosa. Plus, we've already mentioned Luffy's fire powers being possible because of Gear 5, but there have also been other examples of very strange abilities that may have foreshadowed that his powers were more than simple rubber. For example, Luffy's crazy attack Culverin allows him to bend his rubber multiple times mid-air. Now, many opponents such as Doflamingo and even Kaido have remarked that rubber simply shouldn't be able to do this, but now it was likely because of Luffy's true awakening all along, Gear 4 being a kind of pre-step to that. But really, that's not the only bit of foreshadowing for this ridiculous power-up, because in fact, way back during the Impel Down arc, Luffy is talking to these random prisoners, and they even go as far as to say that he must be sent here by destiny. Which makes way more sense later on when we get to see the very first mention of Sun God Nika in episode 1040 during Jinbei's fight against Who's Who. That's because this former member of CP9 was once imprisoned in Impel Down, and it was during his time in that prison that he learned from other prisoners that they sometimes pray to the Sun God Nika, who would supposedly free the prisoners and slaves. Which just adds so much needed context to this scene with Luffy talking to these prisoners here. Which now of course brings us to the real purpose of Luffy's awakening and the true nature of his Devil Fruit. Now, we've already discussed that the Sun God Nika is a legendary figure who freed the slaves, and it's very likely that this figure was also the original Joy Boy from the Void Century, since Sunisha told us that Joy Boy had returned right when Luffy awakened his fruit. And honestly, I personally don't really think that Luffy is literally the old Joy Boy reincarnated. Instead, it's much more likely that Luffy has simply inherited his will and will continue to carry out the task that the old Joy Boy never managed to complete. And so we of course have to ask, what exactly is that task and that promise that he never meant to keep? Well, it's the exact same thing that Luffy has been doing all throughout the story, freeing islands and liberating oppressed people. In fact, the only thing that we know for a fact that the old Joy Boy truly wanted to do was a promise that he left on a poneglyph on Fishman Islands. And while we don't know for 100% sure, we can very much assume that this promise was to bring the fishmen up to the surface where they could live in peace. And so if Luffy is going to complete the task that was unfinished by the previous Joy Boy, it will very likely involve liberating the world and all of the oppressed races such as the fishmen, the Minks, the dwarves, and many other people. In fact, Luffy's return as Joy Boy may have even been left in a prophecy along with the legendary treasure on Laugh Tale, and that's because when Roger finally found the One Piece, all he and his men could do was laugh at what they had found. The former Pirate King even states that he wished he could have lived in the time of Joy Boy, and he also knew that the One Piece treasure somehow couldn't be used until 20 years into the future. But now that Luffy has finally awakened, we assume that the prophesized time has finally come, and Luffy will be able to use whatever the first Joy Boy actually left behind on Laugh Tale, which will ultimately result in a final battle against either the Darkness Fruit user Blackbeard or the secret ruler of the world government, Emu. By the way, Luffy's Gear 5 transformation, funnily enough, is completely white, which is the exact opposite of Blackbeard's darkness, as well as Emu's black outfit that we always see them wearing. And of course, we have to assume because of the epic powers of this Devil Fruit that Luffy will surely come out on top of this final world-changing clash and save the world, which is exactly why the Nika Fruit made it into my top 5 most overpowered Devil Fruits in One Piece. And if you want to know which fruits are even more powerful than this one, you can watch that video right here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.